Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts broadcast. We hope everyone is staying safe and staying well. We are pleased to have Sharon Saline here to talk about motivating your student now that we are at the midpoint of the school year and learning remotely, hybridly, any which way. Before we get started, let me note a couple of housekeeping items. Those of you tuned in to the live webinar may download the slides now by clicking on the Event Resources section of your webinar screen. And if you're interested in the Certificate of Attendance option, look for instructions in the email you receive around an hour after the live broadcast. For those of you listening in replay or podcast mode, you can visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 336 to access the slides, the webinar replay, and the Certificate of Attendance option. Also, I'd like to say that the sponsor of this week's Attitude webinar is Play Attention, Enhanced Brain Health and Performance. For over 25 years, Play Attention has been helping children and adults thrive and succeed. Their NASA-inspired technology and cognitive exercises improve executive function. Your program includes a lifetime membership and a personal executive function coach to customize your plan along the way. Tell them the areas you want to improve, and they will create a customized neurocognitive training plan to help you achieve those goals. Click on the hyperlink for a free consultation or call 788-6786 or go to their website, www.playattention.com. Use coupon code ADDMAG1220, that's 1220, to receive $200 off your Play Attention program. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. Now for today's topic, motivating your student during these times of hybrid learning. At this point in the school year, many parents and educators are feeling frustrated and thwarted in their efforts to teach responsibility, motivation, and persistence to children with ADHD, learning differences, and mood instability. Hybrid and online learning have challenged how kids attend school, approach learning, and feel about themselves. Disruptions in emotional regulation and social relationships have complicated things further. Children want to do well, but often lack the resources and confidence to do so. Sharon Saline will give us some strategies to help with these challenges. Sharon is a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice, working primarily with children, adolescents, and families for the diagnosis, treatment, and intervention of ADHD, learning disabilities, and mental health issues. She is the author of What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, working together to empower kids for success in school and life. You can ask questions of Sharon during her presentation, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can after she finishes. So all that being said, I'll turn it over to Sharon. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Wayne, and thank you to Attitude for inviting me today. I'm thrilled to be here, and welcome to everyone who is watching live. Please bear with me. I'm going to be moving my slides and my notes simultaneously, so there may be a few technological glitches, and I apologize for that. Let's roll up our sleeves and get started. This is an incredibly challenging time. I'm not going to stand here and say, everybody should be doing okay. This is a hard time. Stress and uncertainty are everywhere. And what's happened at this point in the school year is that kids have started with goals and hopes, and things probably are floundering in place. Some kids may be progressing well in some ways, and others may not be progressing very well at all. Or you can see an uneven type of performance in your student. Remote hybrid learning, which was mildly interesting at the beginning of the year, has likely become more tedious. So what's happening is that increased anxiety, frustration, isolation, and hopelessness are getting in the way of kids being able to attend and participate in classes, doing their homework, finishing chores, and participating in interest-based activities, many of which have been canceled or adapted to online venues. Many kids report feeling lonely, bored, and their lives are just simply upended by the pandemic. It's much more of a struggle now to complete and stick with tasks. You're probably seeing negative attitude changes and more pushback. Kids are overwhelmed and they're struggling to see the sense or value in things that they were able to do earlier. There's increased interest and reliance on screens, both for school and for free time. It's often harder to get off of screens because it doesn't seem like there's a lot else to be doing. Interestingly, a June survey by Parents Together found that there's a large disparity in the access to remote learning tools and internet connections, depending on socioeconomic issues. They found that parents with low incomes were 10 times as likely to report that their child was doing little to no remote learning compared to those with incomes of $100,000 or more. Recently, the APA, the American Psychological Association, conducted its latest Stress in America survey in October and found that 81% of teens ages 13 to 17 are reporting the negative impacts of pandemic-related school changes, and 51% are saying that planning for the future feels impossible. In fact, another poll by the APA and the Harris Organization found that nearly 8 in 10 adults, 78%, said the coronavirus pandemic is a significant source of stress in their lives. So everybody is living under this tremendous shadow. I think I'm going to say slide because it's easier. So slide, please. So what's really going on with kids? Josie, age 17, says, so it's like the whole classroom lecture has moved to Zoom, and I know that if I attend the lecture, I'm not going to listen. So I might as well not waste my time because I'm not going to be concentrating anyways, so I just don't go. I show my picture, but I don't actually show up. Sammy, age 15, says, when I'm working, I start maybe getting notifications on my phone and I get really distracted and then I go browse and then I don't know what happens because an hour's passed and I haven't done my homework and now it's dinner. Isaiah, age 12, says, my mom wakes me up for school and then yells at me when I don't move. Why get out of bed for school? There's nowhere to go and I don't see my friends. And finally, Kendra, age 9, says, I miss seeing my friends and my dad having money to get us the stuff we need. I'm scared about him getting sick, and then I won't have food or anything. Slide. So let's go to our first poll. I want to hear from you about what's the biggest challenge you're seeing in your child or teen right now. Loneliness, is dealing with incomplete assignments, attending school but multitasking and not really paying attention, disorganization, or coping with family challenges of food, housing, or job insecurity. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, and then I'll come back when we get your results. Now, what are the characteristics of remote learning? So in this presentation, I'm going to lay out a little bit about what the situation is, and then we're going to move into what you can do differently. But I think it's important for me to define what is remote learning, because there are different types of remote learning. So online learning varies widely. There's synchronous online learning, which is something that's happening at the same time in the same space. Teachers are speaking, teachers are online, students are online, everything is occurring simultaneously. Then there's asynchronous learning, which is can be pre-recorded, and students have to go and actually watch it on their own. There are also different types of online learning. There's one-to-all, so one teacher is speaking to everyone who's listening to them, versus a more interactive type. There are different types of learning activities and technologies. There's online discussion as part of teaching. There are multiple modes of representation: film, stills, sound, all kinds of ways that students can get information. And sometimes there are games and simulations. There's a real difference between taking offline teaching and just recording it versus adapting and engaging in online pedagogy. And that's part of what we're seeing, where kids who are alternative learners, like kids with ADHD or ASD or anxiety or learning disabilities or depression, are really struggling. Asynchronous learning. So learning that is not happening live, where you have to go and you have your assignment and you watch it on your own and you do the work on your own, is much more difficult for neurodiverse students. What helps kids participate in online learning is a positive teacher-student relationship, because it fosters motivation and effort. When we are over-focused on academic skills and tasks, we're going to see kids struggle more, because kids are stressed for all the reasons I just outlined. And these stressors are taxing their developing brains. Stressed brains don't learn well, especially when learning is a challenge to start with. Universal design is something you should become familiar with if you're not, because it builds in a variety of teaching methods to remove barriers to learning and to give all students equal opportunities to succeed. It has flexibility so that lessons can be altered for strengths and challenges. And this is critical for alternative learners. And finally, in online learning or hybrid learning, accommodation plans still apply and should be followed, so that if you have a child who has a 504 or an IEP, they are mandated to receive services and should be receiving services right now. So let's go to the results from the poll. So what I'm seeing is 27% are loneliness and difficulty managing social connections. 42% kids are struggling with incomplete assignments. 42% kids are attending school but still multitasking. 28% disorganized. 26% increase in depression or anxiety. And 2% coping with family challenges. Thank you. We will be addressing at least the disorganization, the multitasking, the incomplete assignments in this workshop. So let's go on to the next slide. So what are some of the online educational challenges that your students are facing right now? Well, large groups really don't work for kindergarten, sometimes to 4th or 5th grade neurodiverse students, because there are too many distractions. They already struggle with, perhaps a lower attention span. They may be trying to communicate with peers via text or social media, and this could definitely be true for your tweens and teens. Worksheets become uninspiring, and they're really a limited method of teaching and learning information, especially for kids with ADHD. You parents, although well-intended, may not be helpful. You're juggling your own issues. Your standards might actually be too high given what's going on. You may be wrapped up in your own challenges, or you may not understand the material. Kids are often left alone for class time, and they're misbehaving. They don't have those real-time role models that they're used to. When you sit in a classroom and the teacher says, okay, everybody get started, that means you look around and everybody's starting to work, so you start to work. That's different when you're at home. You don't have the same kind of monitoring where the teacher can come around and redirect you. You have to monitor yourself. And for kids with ADHD, for whom metacognitive awareness, self-evaluation, is the last and often delayed executive functioning skill to develop, we have to really work hard to help them understand themselves as learners so that they can ask for what they need. And of course, these students are not being held accountable in real time because they can't be. And so that's another challenge for them. It doesn't really matter if I do this. That's how they feel. Next slide, please. So executive functioning challenges are critical for in-person and remote learning, but for life. And so we are going to talk about executive functioning skills related to motivation in this workshop. The more severe the executive functioning challenges are, the higher the likelihood is of a learning disability. And that's why many kids with ADHD have a coexisting learning disability in reading, writing, or math particularly. And the questions that we want to ask, the questions that are required for school in terms of executive functioning are, can I regulate my physical impulses and emotions to attend to what I'm doing or what I'm expected to do? What are doable goals and how do I set them? How do I shift from one task or concept to another? How can I learn from trying and regrouping and trying again? That's that metacognitive awareness I was talking about. How do I organize my activity, my time, my ideas? How do I decide what's most important? Can I recall details for exams? How can I listen and write notes simultaneously? What does it mean to understand the kind of learner I am? Can I check my work for mistakes? And how quickly does my brain absorb and process information? Next slide, please. So we want to improve executive functioning skills together. And this means we want to figure out how to have collaborative family conversations where you identify and work on a goal that matters to you and your child. And I would suggest that in the list of things that you would like to see your child improve on, your child has some items on that list for themselves as well. And that's the place you want to start because that's where their buy-in is. Collaboration increases their buy-in to any problem-solving process. And that's why we use incentives because they provide a motivational push that kids often need. Punishment does not work because it does not teach any skills. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. When we're collaborating, we're discussing neutrally what occurs before, during, and after a situation, and what strategy to use, what language to say to other people or to yourselves, okay? And in this way, you're going to use reflective listening. I heard you say X. Did I get that right? Is there anything else? This is very important for kids with ADHD who often don't feel seen or heard. You may not agree with what they're saying. That's not the point. The point is that you're listening, that you're showing them your compassion. And this means that they will feel met and they will cooperate more with what you're trying to accomplish. You want to think about the issue you want to discuss in advance and come prepared with some thought-provoking questions. You want to brainstorm what the goal, the steps towards reaching the goal that you choose and include at least one of their ideas in the plan. And remember, when you're brainstorming, all ideas are fair game. You're going to reflect on a time where there was a challenge and your child met that challenge, where there was a positive outcome, because we want to explore how to apply some of those tools to this current issue. There might be some tips in how you worked together in the past, things that kids had said to themselves. When kids are stressed, when they're anxious, they have amnesia for successes, for tools they've used that have helped them. We have to be their memory for those tools, for those situations. And I would encourage you to write some of them down because you're probably stressed too. And it's hard to remember what you have to take with you before you go to the grocery store. Do you have your mask? Do you have your glasses? Do you have your wallet, your keys? There's a lot to remember. So take the pressure off yourself. Write some notes. Expect to renegotiate your plan. And what I mean by this is I think it's really important to have a family meeting once a week where you check in, where you set the schedule for the week, where you talk about how your plan is going. And tweak it. That's okay. That's learning. Next slide. So what are the executive functioning skills that most contribute to motivation? And motivation is linked to several executive functioning skills. And we know that executive functioning skills are the directive capacities of the brain right here in the frontal lobes behind your forehead. And they unfold developmentally as people use them, but not in a linear fashion. So motivation is composed of initiation, getting started on something, often without direction and excessive reminding. You're motivated to begin a task. Time management, doing things on time and meeting deadlines, correctly estimating how long something will take, avoiding procrastination. Sustained attention, managing your attention and resisting distractions when faced with a task. Goal-oriented persistence, setting a goal, staying focused on it, and returning to the task right after an interruption, sticking with a task over time. And finally, focus. Focus is a dynamic process of choosing what is critical to notice or recall or do. It's like a flashlight. And I often use this metaphor with kids. Where is the spotlight of your attention? Where are you directing that? So we want to improve our focus, help kids improve their focus by noticing where it is. Most kids notice when they return from drifting off. We're going to try to teach them how to cope when they return more effectively, to have a plan for catching up. And we're not going to shame them for that natural drift that happens in their brains. Next slide. So how do anxiety and depression affect motivation in kids with ADHD? Anxiety disorders are problems related to fears and worries that go beyond what we would typically expect for a child or teen of the same age in a similar situation. Anxiety is all about safety and security. It wants to make uncomfortable feelings and uncertainty go away immediately. That is pretty much impossible right now. We can't do that. There is a thing of uncertainty called COVID that is affecting all of us every day. And it has deprived us of things we love, whether it's a Thanksgiving dinner with family, whether it's playing on a sports team, sitting down and making music with friends. We are all struggling with that loss. Anxiety is experienced cognitively and physically. Worried thoughts foster anxiety in the body. Anxious kids have low self-confidence and problematic peer relationships, as well as academic difficulties. But we can't, erase anxiety. It is a natural human response that comes from serving a purpose. Our goal isn't to dismiss it entirely because we will never succeed at that goal. And I know this intimately as an anxious person, okay? What we want to do is learn how to respond to it in ways that are healthy and manageable. Anxiety distorts our thinking and exaggerates our emotions. It reflects all or nothing thinking and a negative expectancy. It's an I can't versus let's try and see what happens. Now, untreated anxiety often leads to depression. And many kids right now are struggling with depression. They feel hopeless. They feel helpless more days than not. Why bother is something that you hear a lot. Nothing matters. There's a powerlessness to change their lives, to change an outcome. And so effort can seem less and less important. If you feel like your child or teen is experiencing an atypical amount of anxiety or depression, if you're seeing them withdraw, if they're more than you hear about other kids, if they're not eating, if they're not putting their clothes on or showering or showing up for things that they previously enjoyed, I would strongly encourage you to take them to the primary care provider and talk with a pediatrician or family doc or a nurse practitioner about what's been going on. All of these traits of anxiety and depression are how they infiltrate and disrupt motivation and increase procrastination and lethargy. Next slide. How are we going to motivate students in the midst of this pandemic to do the tough stuff? Well, things actually have to be engaging and interesting for kids to want to do them. Interest stimulates motivation. And there are two types of motivation. Extrinsic motivation refers to an outside request, or reward, or responsibility that depends on achieving a goal. You You turn your permission form in for driver's ed on Friday so you can start the online class on Monday. Intrinsic motivation means striving toward a goal for personal satisfaction or accomplishment. You attempt to run for 3 miles instead of 2. You want to make that next level on your computer game. When a task is fundamentally unrewarding or uninteresting, homework, doing the dishes, walking the dog, taking out the trash, there may be less excitement. There's less dopamine. And for brains with ADHD that already have lower amounts of dopamine, it takes them twice as long or more to get moving. When there's no clear satisfaction or benefit from a task, there's a struggle to do it. An external incentive and a reward that matters to kids encourages them until the satisfaction of doing it, that internal reward system kicks in the late teens, early 20s for neurotypical brains. So we want to teach kids that the have-tos come before the want-tos, because that's what we do as adults. If you think about yourself, I'm sure that you probably, well, I'll say for myself, after dinner, I want to just watch my show on TV, but I have dishes to do and I really don't want to do them. But I also don't want to wake up in the morning to a sink full of dishes and then have my husband be upset that there was a sink full of dishes and he couldn't make breakfast. So I'm going to do my dishes first and I'm going to reward myself with my show. This is exactly what I'm talking about. We want to teach kids how to do that so when they're adults, that's how they think. We're going to start small and we're going to look for small wins. Because when kids are unmotivated, they often expect failure. They've given up on themselves because they have received a message or several messages that adults have given up on them too, or been unable to understand them. We have to remember what it takes for kids to get through every day and how to help them and notice when they've succeeded. Next slide. So I just talked a little bit about why we should use incentives. I want to say that incentives change the conversation. Often incentives fail because parents don't collaborate with their kids about them. Kids have to be involved in choosing the incentives to get their buy-in. And what we want to do is sit down and say, what are things that you love to do? How can we link what you love to do to something you have to do so that what you love comes after the have to? No activity is too unimportant to consider. And time with you can also be an incentive, which means you do the thing and we're going to spend time doing something fun together. You don't do the thing and then we're going to spend time together doing a chore of my choice. Either way, you're together. It's just what you're doing changes. What's very important is that we want to start to think about your relationship with your kids. You can't be negotiating things every minute of every day. That's why we want to have some kind of general plan, a general routine that sets up expectations. In a moment of an explosion, of anger, of meltdown, you cannot renegotiate the terms of your agreement. Collaboration rarely happens under pressure, and definitely listening does not. So what you want to do is slow things down, ask for time, and make an agreement of when you're going to talk about this. Next slide. So, of course, many kids want screens for their incentives. And I just want to quickly say that I think screen time is a privilege. It's not an entitlement. So you want to think about, as a parent, how much screen time do you want your child to have? Not for school. And when do you want them to have that? And I would encourage you to break it down. You can have this and then this. And the reason you're going to break it down is because, let's say I talked with a family yesterday and they said that their 14-year-old could have 3 hours of non-school screen time a day. And so we broke it up into an hour and a half is the automatic. She gets that every day unless she's posting inappropriate information, she's going to websites that are not okay by parental standards, or she's sending emails that parents get wind of that are not acceptable. So in those situations, that that gimme time would be altered. The rest of the time, that extra hour and a half, is based on her completing things. And it will come after that initial gimme period, after it comes after dinner. So some of those things that she has to do, she has to watch her little brother and play with him for a half hour. She needs to show them that she's completed her homework, and she has to set and clear the table. And for each of those 3 tasks, she earns 30 minutes. Super clear. And they like this plan, and she liked this plan because then she knew what to expect. Okay. Remember to use screen time to serve your needs. Have your kids have their screen time when you need to work, when you need to cook dinner, if you have a special project you're working on. And that there are different kinds of screen times. All screens are not alike. There's phone, there's television, there's computer, there's gaming, there's exercising with Wii. Figure out what the screen time is going to be. And maybe there's a nightly family TV show that you watch. If you are unclear about how much screen time you think your child should have, talk to your pediatrician or family practitioner. Feel free to set controls on Netflix, phones, iPads, particularly if kids are sneaking screens at night. Shut your server down. A lot of families do this. There's nothing to be ashamed of. And you want to balance these different kinds of screen time, but also balance your own use of screens. Yolanda, age 13, says to me, "What I can't stand is when dad stays on his phone but tells me to get off mine. It drives me crazy. It's so hypocritical. I get really mad. He's not even paying attention to me." So I would urge you to consider screen-free dinners, maybe a day off from screens or afternoon off as a family. Signs that there's too much screen time for your kids would be headaches, disrupted sleep, vision fatigue, and a loss of interest in other activities and a hyper focus on that screen activity. We're going to move to our next poll in the next slide, and which is what seems to interfere with your child's ability to start or stay motivated. Too much interest in social media, limited attention span, organization is not a priority, easily overwhelmed, stress and anxiety, learning from home, and missing classroom social cues. All right, so let's get into the strategies for improving motivational skills. When we're talking about initiation, initiation is about breaking tasks down to smaller, achievable parts. This is how we get kids started. And no size is too small. And we are going to notice and reward efforting and successes with our validation, our praise. It's okay to give specific praise. I really liked how you did your homework when you said you were going to. Or thank you for clearing the table when I asked. That lets kids know, and particularly kids for ADHD, that you've seen them. Make eye contact when you give them this feedback. Other tips for initiation would be have a daily guideline of what to do to get started with notifications. Review how to use and interact with online learning technology. Sometimes not knowing exactly how to use the medium, particularly if there's a new thing that kids have to learn, can be a barrier to getting started. Include cope ahead plans for tech glitches. What are you going to do when and if technology lets you down, because it will? You want to ask the teachers to be explicit about what kinds of technology or tools will be needed to complete a specific learning task, a lecture, assignment, an online discussion, just like the teacher would list the materials needed for an assignment in person. They have to be doing the same thing for online learning. What does your son or daughter need at their desk, their kitchen table? What programs will they need to have open? What are the steps they have to follow? This has to be scaffolded heavily at the beginning of a class or a course, and it can wean off as kids get more comfortable or not. For a lot of kids who are neurodiverse learners, they need this kind of scaffolding every day. It's also worthwhile talking to the teachers about trying to present information in bite-sized chunks on these online platforms. Now, let's go to the results of the poll. Let's see. I see, 43% limited attention span, 42% learning from home and missing classroom cues, 37% easily overwhelmed, 37%, 32% organization is not a priority, and 28% stress and anxiety, 26% too much social media. Thank you so much. All right, let's go on to the next slide, which is time management. So people who live with ADHD are often time blind. And that's not a disparaging comment. They just don't feel or understand time the way that people who do not have ADHD are able to do. Not all of them, because time management is an executive functioning skill. So some of us are challenged with that. You might see me running in the next 10 minutes to get through the rest of my slides. So time happily responds very well to direct instruction. We want to use external clocks, reminders, timers, and alarms. Kids need to see time moving. An analog clock is helpful, or a business that I wish I owned stock in, the time timer. I was talking to one of my clients who's 22 yesterday, and she was telling me that she uses her time timer when she has to get ready for bed, because otherwise it'll take up 2 hours, but she sets it for 45 minutes, and then she can watch how much time she has left before it's time for her to get in bed. And this is something that we've been working on because she has very bad insomnia. So we want to teach kids what they can do in a certain amount of time by thinking backwards. That's something I also did with this client yesterday. She wants to be in bed at midnight. So what are the things that she has to do, and how much time will each of those take? So when does she get started? That would be 10:45. We want to make use of these external learning systems, shared calendars electronically. And there are some electronic versions of visual countdown timers. One that I like a lot is called the tomato-timer.com. One of the challenges for alternative learners is managing asynchronous learning, because it requires extra time management and you're not accountable to a routine. And so if you have kids who are doing work with asynchronous online learning, be prepared to help them set up a very clear routine about when to get started, what they're doing, when to take a break, etc. Next slide. Now, there are 3 types of procrastination: perfectionism, avoidance, and productive. And of course, procrastination can be debilitating, and kids can't start or finish things. They may want things to be perfect, so they'll give up. They may avoid something unpleasant, so they'll give up. They may keep themselves busy with something else and give up on the big task. That's productive procrastination. I do that a little bit myself. Shame affects motivation at the core level and contributes to procrastination. It reduces the desire to ask for help because there's a belief about your kids. Your kids have a belief about their own incompetence. Jared, age 15, says, I procrastinate when I don't like something, or it seems too big, or I don't know how to do it. I don't like asking for help. I never have. I know logically it's not a big deal if I ask for help, but it feels like I'm not capable or competent or whatever. I've asked my dad for help with math in the past, but he's not the greatest tutor and he makes me feel stupid. Like saying, you don't know how to do this? Why not? It makes me nervous. I just say I'm fine. Next slide. Organization and prioritizing. These are key contributors to motivation. Then they influence each other. So we have to be able to find an organizing system that works for your child. Interestingly, I have a teen that I'm working with who is, he's almost 16, and he has refused a calendar for at least a year. And this year, in our last conversation, also yesterday, he said, I need a planner. I can't remember things. And if you want me to remember things, then I have to write them down. And I said, well, that's what we're talking about, because we were talking about the fact that he needs to write his assignments down in his strategies class, have the teacher check them, and then he can get started to make sure he's translated the information appropriately so he knows what to do. this was a big step for us. So we have to figure out some type of organization. Another family, they came up with a routine with chores. The kids didn't want to use a whiteboard or a printed out calendar. They wanted to create one on a chalkboard with Post-its so they could move something from the I have to do to the done column. And that worked for them. When we're organizing things, we have to make lists to help kids get through their day and refer kids back to the list rather than having them tell you or ask you what's the next thing they have to do. This teaches them to sequence. We also need to give them extra time for organizing their materials. And we want to organize the materials online. What are the folders? What are the files? What do you need? Just like you have to organize in real space, you have to organize your stuff online. And this may be a big ask for your child. So figure out how you can help them, or if they refuse to work with you, who can help them at school? Okay. When we're prioritizing, what I see with kids with ADHD is they can do a brain dump, but they can't order things. Everything seems equally important. So we want to set up a strategy for approaching homework or other tasks with the best order. Now, think about yourself. Do you like to do something easy, get warmed up, then do something hard, then maybe do the medium thing? Or do you like to start off with the hard thing and then reward yourself with the easy thing and then the medium thing? Talk with your kids. What's easy for them? What's hard? How do they like to work? Then let's assign an amount of time. When do they start to drift off? Maybe they can only concentrate for 10 minutes and then they need a minute to, go to the bathroom or get water or pet the dog or something. That's okay. We have to set up a structure that makes sense for them. Okay. And when you set up a strategy like this for approaching homework, they then can feel a sense of competence and they have a routine, and routines are so important for building executive functioning skills. You can expect to teach these skills, organizing and prioritizing and time management, over and over and over again. Next slide, please. Sustained attention. Now, this is a really big issue for online learning because kids are multitasking. And as we know, multitasking doesn't actually exist in the brain. Actually, our brains are shifting from one thing to another, and they get exhausted in that process over time because they use up glucose in the brain, which is food. And so the brain starts to lose energy, and then it runs on cortisol, adrenaline. So we want to set these realistic work periods. We want to provide feedback. We want to have kids work for a period of time, earn a short reward or break, work for a period of time, earn another short reward, finish their work, get something that's meaningful to them. Okay? Distraction online is a huge barrier to sustained attention because we all socialize, play, and learn and communicate from the same screen. So you want to think about using, and I would suggest in some cases you have to use apps that block access to certain sites while doing schoolwork. There's the Freedom app, there's Rescue Time, Brain Focus. All of these are things that are worth looking into. Make sure notifications are turned off for non-school apps during school. Hide apps in folders so they're not as easily acceptable. Use different browsers for fun stuff and work stuff. And then talk with the teachers about how they are engaging neurodiverse learners in their classrooms. Next slide. Goal-directed persistence. You're going to co-create reachable goals, and you're going to talk about how and what type and when. You are going to offer neutral cues to redirect. You're going to explore obstacles to reaching their goals and strategize about what to do with them. You're going to, again, make sure you have a plan for what to do when your technology fails you or when the internet drops. And you might want to consider using an app such as Stay on Task that randomly pops up with a cue to refocus the attention on the task itself. And you can control those. Next slide. So what I'm talking about here essentially is setting appropriate goals, okay? Kids who are neurodiverse learners have to work a lot harder than their peers in so many areas, socially, academically, emotionally. And so they're spending time all day on activities that are both challenging and frustrating to them and can leave them with not just exhaustion, but resentment and decreased motivation. In the pandemic, whatever your child was capable of before may have very little to do with what they can do right now. Consider this. Create two sets of expectations. One set of expectations based on tasks they enjoy and are easy and interesting to them. And then another set of expectations based on subjects that are tough for them. We want to shore up their strengths and build and meet their challenges simultaneously, but not identically. It's okay to make accommodations for tough classes in hybrid learning without giving kids a pass. Above all, you want to stay positively connected with your kids and make them feel valued as intelligent people whose brains just learn differently and whose brains are struggling right now in this type of learning environment. We want to focus on adaptability and growing self-esteem as well as learning. I'm not sure about that slide. So tools for reducing anxiety and stress. So of course, as I said earlier, predictability is comforting. Routines foster those all-important executive functioning skills. And we want to rely on noticing kids efforting. What is efforting? It is a word I made up. And what it is trying to do something. Okay, that's where kids with ADHD need support. Yes, when they finish the goal, of course, but actually applying themselves, sitting down and doing it, they need a lot of acknowledgement for that because that's really hard for them, particularly when they have to initiate something they don't like. So you want to consider working alongside your kids as much as possible. Often kids with ADHD can't stay on task by themselves. I'm a real proponent of family work time. Can you all be in the same room or the same area of the house or the apartment on your headphones, checking in periodically? Okay. Sometimes kids can't read the directions or understand what they're telling them to do. Sometimes teens and tweens are lack the impulse control to stay with the work at hand instead of going to YouTube or TikTok. So if you're there, if you're present, you can monitor when they're getting bored. Help your kids see their friends. Kids are lonely. And review the guidelines for safe contact, physical distancing, and make sure they always have masks and hand sanitizer, and talk with them about what's happening because this loneliness, this social isolation can be fueling their procrastination, can be fueling their lack of motivation because they're feeling dejected and discouraged. Things change, and we want to keep a growth mindset. You're trying something, and if it's not working, you're going to try something else. Ask your kids for suggestions when they're stuck. Aim for steadiness from yourself and from them rather than perfection. Next slide. I encourage you to please stay connected with me. Check out my website, www.drSharonSaline.com, where I have a number of free resources. Make sure that you get your free downloadable from this session on motivating kids with ADHD. And follow me on Facebook or other types of social media. And finally, please join me every Friday at 4 on AttitudeMag.com on their Facebook page where I do a Q&A. And it's really become a highlight of my pandemic career, and I hope it will continue after. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sharon. That was excellent. A lot of good questions, as usual. One parent is challenged by the fact that the teachers are not acknowledging her child's IEP. Is there a phone call that should be made, maybe to the IEP group?
Absolutely. So teachers are overwhelmed. So I'm saying this with my full compassion for teachers. Honestly, in my school district here, it's shocking to me at the high school that there's not a requirement that kids turn their cameras on when they're in school. And so at the high school level, teachers will be teaching to a series of screens with people's names on it and no people. That's so demoralizing. Teachers get juice from those interactions just the way students do. So I think that, and teachers are overwhelmed. Many of them are not particularly technologically comfortable, and so they don't know how to adapt to this kind of learning. So I think if your teacher's not following the IEP, or if your child needs more support than's already been set up on the IEP or 504, go back. You have the right to call a meeting and renegotiate.
Okay. One mom wants to teach her daughter intrinsic motivation. Mm-hmm. How do I do this with a 7 to 8 year old? Apparently, extrinsic rewards don't seem to work for her daughter.
Well, that's very challenging. I mean, I think the thing that you could start with is, doing something that she enjoys and how she feels good about that because she enjoys it, and explore a little bit about that. And then if you want to use intrinsic motivation, set up some chores that are related or tasks to things she likes first, so she can get a sense of what that feels like. I think the key to using extrinsic motivators, and that will later translate to intrinsic motivators, is to pick something that matters to them. And so usually what happens is that we as parents give our kids a lot. We feel terrible that they're living through this awful time. And that may be giving them too much screen. That might be, making accommodations for inappropriate behaviors. What I would really encourage you to do is to perhaps restrict some of the things you're giving away for free and have her work towards them in a way where she can achieve some, and have others that she require a little bit more effort.
Mm-hmm. One parent has praised you. They've used the suggestions from past webinars, and their kids are doing very well grade-wise.
Thank you.
But they want to know, they're spending a lot of effort just accomplishing that. And do we leave the organization, for instance, the child is very disorganized, maybe leave that alone during the pandemic season and tackle it at a different juncture in time? I guess what you're saying is, do we want to put too much on their plate?
No. Things are going well enough. I applaud you. That's great. We want to do more of what works and less of what doesn't. And if what you're doing is working now, God bless you. Let's stick with that. The organization is the skill that kids can learn very quickly over time. I mean, you've probably learned it in different ways over time. I'm still learning certain things about how to organize myself online and such. So I would just stick with what's going well and enjoy that. And then you'll look in the organization when life gets back to whatever normal looks like.
Mm-hmm. A very practical question. Should the incentives be written down like a contract for the child as a way for him to remember them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Writing things down is really important for kids with ADHD and also kids who have high functioning autism or learning disabilities, because really, I think for all kids, but particularly for those kids, because they can see it. They can refer back to it. They don't have to try to remember it and then argue with you about how they remembered it correctly and you've gotten it wrong.
Is there, and this one's interesting, it's sort of parental spying. Is there any software you recommend that allows you to view your child's screen from your screen so you can see what your child is doing on the computer while you are on yours?
I don't know the answer to that. I know that you can share screens, that there are lots of ways that you can share, that there are ways to share screens. I mean, obviously you can do that on Zoom, and I think you can do it. I don't know if you can do it on Google. I'm not a technology expert. I just know that when my tech guy helps me, he's like, let me share your screen.
Well, what do you think of the whole idea of the parents sort of doing that? If there was, what do you think?
You can't do it without the other person's acknowledgement, right? That other person So you'd have to have a conversation about why you're doing it and what your plan is to stop doing that when your child is cooperating. Like if your child is really not cooperating, then that's a bigger conversation. And if you feel like you need to monitor their screen because you yourself are working, then I would set up some sort of program. Like I want this set up because you're not showing up and you're failing and you don't want to fail and I don't want you to fail. And,
Right.
and, if I'm working, I can send you an email or we can get back in touch or a message, a text message or a notification. So we can brainstorm together. Mm-hmm. And that could be a useful thing for parents who are working at home and kids who are learning at home and are on their own. I think the challenge is that it's going to be hard to let have a teenager say, sure, you can see my screen, no problem.
Right. Exactly. Right. This is a great alternative for using screen time as a reward. I wanted to bring this up because apparently this parent's son uses podcasts as a reward. He can listen for hours. Would you consider this screen time? It's still electronic stimulation, but it's auditory and not technically screen.
I think that what I'm talking about, he's listening to podcasts, which has, which is fantastic. He's learning and laughing and getting information in another way. So I think that you would want to use that judiciously as screen time. I think that maybe that's just fun time. Like, he's relaxing. He's listening to a podcast. I personally wouldn't consider that screen time for me, but I'm not other parents who are struggling.
Right. This one is a little dense, a little complex. The motivation for my child is there. Her issue is that online she speeds through everything without putting much effort or focus into it. In person, she works more slowly and gets better grades. So what suggestions do you have on getting middle schoolers to stay invested online?
That's a really big question. I have a good friend who's a school psychologist at a local middle school, and she says middle school kids are really having a hard time. So while elementary school kids are getting more supervision and support with online material, and generally can do okay with a little less, middle schoolers want that independence that they are, maybe if they're in 8th grade that they were used to having when school was in person, or they're just, pushing, eagerly for, but they're not really ready for it. And so I think that if kids are showing you with their behavior that they can't handle something, then they're showing you they need more support and scaffolding. And what I would recommend in this situation is a conversation between you, the parent, your child, and someone from the school to work on a solution that everybody knows is acceptable to everyone else. Because you as a parent, you can't hold this all by yourself. You need the school with you. And you and the school, when you're aligned, have more, really more authority. And when I say authority, I don't mean control. I mean just authority to help your, to help your student move more successfully into change. You're working together. And that's would be the goal here.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, several parents have asked, what are your thoughts on teachers who are taking off points for late homework? It reduces motivation in my son when he knows that even 100 becomes an F if it's too late.
So this is what I was talking about in terms of accommodations right now, that teachers have particular standards, and that's fine. But right now, kids who are alternative learners are struggling a lot, and they may need more time to complete assignments. And so I think it's important to go back to the school and say, listen, he needs like a deadline A, and then a little extension for that you and I can know that he has, but he can't know. So
right.
You know what I'm saying? So the deadline comes. So the deadline is you need to turn this in on Thursday by 3:00. But I know as a teacher, I'm going to give you another 24 hours, and your parents may know that, but you as a student have to work toward 3:00. And then you as a student have to take the responsibility, say, I need a little more time. And then your teacher can give it to you so that you understand that you have a little leeway. However, it's very important that when that leeway is given, that it's couched in, we are in a pandemic. I understand pandemic learning can be challenging for you sometimes. The goal is that you turn it in on Thursday at 3:00. If you come to me on Wednesday at 3:00 or Thursday at 9:00 and say, I need a little more time, that's fine. So you structure how this extension is going to work. And maybe you structure how many extensions a student can have in the course of a semester. I think that gives kids hope, but it doesn't let them know that, everything will have a free pass and be extended for the rest of their lives.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, that was excellent. I think the hour is up. Thanks so much for being here and sharing your expertise. Once again, it was wonderful, practical.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. I wish you my heartfelt, support in helping your learners right now. And please reach out either through our Facebook Live or to me through my website if you have any further questions or concerns. And thank you, Wayne, for your wonderful moderation. It's always a pleasure with you.
Thank you again. Thanks everyone for being here and have a great day.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.